Welcome to Mr. Marr History. Today we're looking at advanced higher history and considering how we go about writing exam essays. We'll begin by looking at the marking and timing associated with writing essays at advanced higher level. In the first place, it's important you know what timing you're going for. The final exam for advanced higher history takes 3 hours, and in that time you have to answer 2 essays and 3 source questions. You should aim for around 50 minutes per essay. It's really important you don't spend too long on one single essay, because this would then be at the expense of the other essay and the source questions. As a general guide, you might spend your time as follows. Writing a plan, taking around 3 minutes. It may seem that this is wasted time, but in fact having a clear idea of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it will save problems later on. Your introduction might take you around 5 minutes to write, and this would leave around 36 minutes to write the main sections. Finally, this would leave around 6 minutes for a conclusion. Of course, these are not exact times, but you may wish to stick broadly to something along these lines. In terms of marking, this is how it works. Your essays are worth 25 marks, and will be graded based on 4 criteria. Firstly, structure. This means it's very important that you follow a very clear plan throughout the essay, including an obvious introduction, clear main sections, split into paragraphs, and also a clear conclusion which answers the explicit question being posed. You'll be marked based on analysis, evaluation, and line of argument. In simple terms, this is how you argue the relevance of your points throughout the essay. Not simply giving fact, but explaining why they are relevant and what they prove in terms of your overall argument. You'll also be marked based on thoroughness. This is where you have the opportunity to show how much you know about a topic by giving as much detail as possible, but ensuring that all such information is linked to analysis and evaluation. Finally, you'll be graded based on historical sources. This is where you give relevant and regular reference to different historians' views on the particular topic you're discussing. Let's consider then a bit more about historiography and how we look at historian opinions. It's essential that you include relevant reference to the views of historians at advanced higher. Otherwise, the essay that you're writing will not get pass marks, a maximum of 12 marks. It's therefore important that you begin reading and researching as soon as you start the course. This is not something that should be left till late on. Historiography should also ideally be blended throughout your essay. Don't just have a section at the end where you throw in everything you know about historians' views. In an ideal world, you should aim to include at least 3 or 4 views in each essay, but 1 is the bare minimum you should be going for. A minimum standard would be simply "some historians have argued," where you outline some of the main arguments which are made, even if you don't know the specific people who made them. There's 2 main ways that you can go about writing historiography. The first and most obvious one perhaps, but can potentially be difficult, is direct quotes. In this case you would simply use quote marks to present the historian's argument. However, another approach, and actually one that might be easier in the sense that it requires you to not remember the exact, is to paraphrase. This is when you simply summarise a historian's argument in your own words. For example, Detlef Bucher suggests, and then you would go on to outline the view. There's different ways you can present your historiography. The simplest one is just a drop-in, simply putting in an argument that's been made by a historian at the relevant point of your essay. A better approach would be to talk about reasons. This is when you don't simply give the historian's view, but you explain why they think this. And a comparison is especially good. This is when you give an idea of not what one historian thinks, but rather what others do, whether they agree or disagree. Giving reasons for the historian's views or comparing them is the best thing to do if you want high marks. Let's now look at how you go about planning an essay. There are different features to keep in mind. Firstly, it's really important to think as what is the exact question? What are you being asked to do? For instance, are there any relevant dates included? Does it have an isolated factor that you must discuss? You can look at what your context will be. What do you know about the general period the essay covers? Is there any useful facts that will help you introduce the essay? What factors are you going to look at? The best way to split up your essay is to look at least 2 or 3 potential issues which can help answer the question. What do you think these will be, and do you know what historians think about them? Finally, what's your conclusion going to be? What do you hope to argue throughout the essay? One potential approach is to spread out your information like so. You can write the question in the middle. Then, firstly, you can consider what the question means, for example, dates or isolated factors, any context that you know about the general period. You can think of the factors you might discuss, as well as historians' views associated with these, and finally what your line of argument is. It's not mandatory to make a mind map like this to plan, but it might help you, especially when you first start learning how to write advanced higher history essays. Let's look at then how we write the exact essay then, including the specific sections. Your essay should include the following information. We need an introduction, where you summarise the general context, identify historians' views, define your question and line of argument, and give an idea of what your essay plan is. You should then have your main sections. You're aiming to discuss 2 to 4 issues, ideally 3, and this is where you include facts that you know about them and analyse them and evaluate their relevance to the overall question. Finally, you have your conclusion. This is when you can give a summary of the different points, comparing all the factors, and then clearly answer the exact question, using evidence to support this. Let's look at an example essay and consider each section in more detail. This particular example is drawn from the Nazi Germany topic. We'll begin by looking at how you write an introduction in much more detail than we've already discussed. This is what we would aim to include. We want to identify and define the question. It's important you give some understanding of what the question is actually going to involve. And at this point you can also give brief and relevant background, what we might call context. This is showing what you know about what is happening in the general era. You should also outline different historians' views and interpretations. What are the main historical themes that people believe about this topic? You can name the factors that will be discussed in your essay. This gives an idea of the importance of each factor and also of the general plan your essay will take. You can introduce your line of argument, which is what should going to be your ultimate conclusion, and hopefully something that's linked to this throughout the entire essay. Remember to make sure you answer the exact question which is being posed. For example, one approach would be to simply say, in this essay it will be argued that, and then outline what you intend to say. Here's an example one. We can see we begin with some context, which we outline the general background to the era we're discussing, and we also give a quick idea of what the question is going to be. We then outline what historians think about this topic, and at the same time have also mentioned some of the factors which will be considered, whilst at the end outlining what we make our overall argument to be. Let's look now at how you write the main sections of these essays. While discussing each factor, this is the ideal approach. You should introduce the factor using a topic sentence that refers to the question, reminding you and the examiner of what you're aiming to do. You should include detailed evidence that describes the factor, giving as much facts as you can, including for examples or statistics and so on. It's crucial you analyse this evidence, explain why it's relevant to the question, explain what it proves, explain why it's perhaps not as relevant as other factors, and so on. If you can, show some awareness of what historians think about this particular factor and issue. Finally, include evaluation at the end, which is essentially a mini conclusion when you make a judgment based on the overall question for that individual factor. For example, this might be a point where you explain which the most important issue is. One approach, which you may remember from higher, is using the idea of a FIDO structure. You name the factor you're going to discuss, you give information about this where you describe facts, you then debate the importance of these facts, showing why they are or are not relevant. You describe historians' views, and then you make an overall judgment about the importance of that factor to the overall question. Remember, you're aiming to discuss 2 to 4 topics as part of this, and you should keep referring back to the wording of your question when you analyse and evaluate. For example, in our example essay, 3 factors have been identified. We would look at economic factors, we would look at political weaknesses and mistakes, and we would look at the role of Adolf Hitler. The example you're about to look at covers economic factors. We can say economic factors played a key role in causing the collapse of the Weimar government. This is our topic sentence. We go on to give information about this, describing what happened at the time. We then debate the importance of these points, explaining in the first case why it was relevant to helping the Nazis, and then looking at why it wasn't. We can go on and give further evidence if we happen to know this, and we can also analyse these points as well. We can also then, if we know any, give historians' views on this topic, before making an overall judgment at the end. Let's now go on to finally look at how we write our conclusion. A good conclusion is an essential part of a good essay, and your conclusion should do the following. You should give a definitive answer to the exact question which you are answering. Make sure you don't skirt around any isolated factors or such like. You should also summarise the main points of your discussion, linking to your overall line of argument. This could involve you comparing the importance of different factors. If you've written many conclusions at the end of each section, this is fairly straightforward. Finally, you should finish with a clear sentence which answers the exact question, making it very clear that you have dealt with the specific topic which is being posed. Here's an example conclusion. We begin with a very clear statement of what our actual conclusion is, answering the exact question which was posed. We then go on to look at evidence that supports this, including introducing the different factors and comparing their relevance. Finally, we restate our overall conclusion to the exact question. In summary then, this is how we write our advanced higher history essays. We have our introduction, where we describe background facts on the topic, outline historians' views and the factors you intend to discuss, and then define the question and state your line of argument. Your main section will involve you talking about ideally at least 3 factors. You should introduce the factor that you intend to discuss. You should then go on to give relevant information about this by describing with detail and information. You should debate the importance of these points by explaining firstly why your evidence is relevant, and then perhaps why each factor is not so relevant to answering the question. If you can, you should outline what historians think about the topic, and then make an overall judgment about the importance of that factor based on your overall question. In your conclusion, you should clearly answer the exact question which is being posed, and you should give evidence that supports this answer. This is where you can bring in the comparison about the importance of all the factors. Advanced Higher History, How to Write Exam Essays. It's really that simple.